I invite this nice gentleman who wrote a book called Flashbacks. His name is Sean Bartok. And I'm sitting watching his presentation, and up pops a drawing of these beings. So they have these very heavy brows, okay? Wrinkles here, these tubes that came out. Not the big wraparound eyes, but larger than our eyes.
Tubes.
And the tubes in Sean's drawings, they were like tubes in the neck. But on the ranch, the tubes came out with this like protection thing over their body.
So it's like they're wearing some kind of suit that has some kind of
some sort of protection of their torso. The other type that was reported there were these Nordics. And they said that these two were in conflict with one another.
What did they look like?
Nordics are a kind of, I've heard, I've never heard about the weird tubey people.
That's really bizarre. I have drawings. I have drawings.
I'd like to see the tubey people. But the Nordic thing I've heard about, because,
What's the Nordic thing?
They're typical blonde, blue-eyed, very,
aliens.
Wait, the aliens look like Scandinavian?
Yes, they have like kind of long beards, robes.
Some of them do. Some of them are reported.
Sort of like, Hello and welcome to another extraordinary episode of Chinwag, the most extraordinary episode yet. I'm Paul Giamatti, and I'm joined by my friend, co-host, expert on all things bizarre, Professor Stephen Asma.
Yeah, and we are recording this in Denver, Colorado, where we were happy to take part in a live Series Fest panel on starseeds and aliens.
Extraordinary stuff. Before we get going, I do want to thank Denver Community Media for coming in on a Sunday and helping us record today's podcast. Many, many thanks. Thank you so much. Now, while in the Mile High City, we did not want to miss the opportunity to speak to a real-life investigator of UFO sightings, Paige.
Katie is also the co-host of MUFON What's Up radio broadcast and is currently writing her second book, High Strangeness, on a Colorado ranch.
Welcome, Paige. Thank you for coming to speak with us. Thanks for doing this.
Oh,
Katie,
it's my
absolutely,
pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's my favorite topic.
Good. Well, it's kind of one of our favorite topics too. I mean, it's a thing I've been interested in all my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've never had any experience of anything, so it's not like I have that kind of grounding in it, but it's like I've just been interested in it my whole life. And I feel like you hear less about it now than you used to at one time.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's happening less. Is it? Is it like actually not occurring as much, or is it just happening as much we just don't hear about it?
Yeah. So abduction for me is interesting in I just need to for me, I kind of came in as a skeptic, and my experience is I had a lot of military involvement. So one of my questions has always been, how much is like your shirt, mind control, MK Ultra, Black Access Special Projects, these things. I mean, we know there's over 150 of these projects going on since post-World War II. And so how much is it as military and not? So when it comes to the abduction phenomenon, for me, it was like this logical process of, okay, first you need to decide for yourself whether you think we're actually being visited by extraterrestrials or other beings that can actually physically get to Earth, because you talk about propulsion and transportation. How are they getting here? Are there portals? Is there, all this stuff? So then the next logical step is if you say yes to that and you believe they visited, and perhaps they even seeded humanity, right? And we are them. And
Star seeds.
It's a little different from star seed.
Yeah, a little. Yeah, if they messed with our DNA, in the past, it would make sense to me, because I think if we visited another planet, we would probably abduct and study, right?
Yes.
So if you believe,
and mess with people, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just like the next logical step, right? If we believe they are here, then they're probably taking people, and for what purpose? And you hear all different theories on this. And of course, there's really credible cases, the Travis Walton case from 1975, and I know Travis. And when I first met Travis Walton, I'm like, that's a haunted man. Like, his story changed in the fact where he at first it was a terrifying experience for him when he was injured.
Yeah, we should, for people who don't know that story, we should just sketch it really quick, right?
Yeah,
he's a logger with his friends, and then he's just driving down the road, and then what happens to him, like exactly?
Right. They see a light, he's got all I think, how many were there? 6 or 7?
There were a bunch of guys.
Yeah, a bunch of guys, all the loggers in the pickup truck. And Travis gets out and, they're like, get back. What are you doing? And he basically...
He was the one guy.
He was the one guy that got hit and struck with this blue beam of light. And
disappeared.
And
for like a week, right?
For several days.
Right. And then he reappears in town. And Travis, I believe something really happened to him. And he has the film Fire in the Sky, and he's remaking it because, of course, they sensationalize that film a little bit. He goes, no, that's not. But, where that was a really terrifying experience for him, and I can't really speak for him, but just talking to him personally, he later come to realize that perhaps they took him aboard the craft to actually heal him. And they brought him back and kind of fixed him. Otherwise, he might have died. So he kind of looks at it as like they protected him and saved him.
So does he feel like he changed in a kind of positive way from this?
Yes, so many abductees do.
Oh, they do. So there's a kind of psychic growth that happens for a lot of these people. There's a kind of like expansion that happens rather than the trauma of of inhibiting you. It can open you up.
Yeah, that is so common. And so we have, we lost him recently, but there's a very well-known hypnotherapist. He was a psychologist out of Laramie, Wyoming, by the name of Dr. Leo Sprinkle.
Yeah,
and he worked with contactees and abductees and also did past life regression and hypnosis and that. And so I spent 3.5 years digging through his archives and research and reading letters, and I got the book out of it, Letters of Love and Light, because Dr. Lee would always sign his letters, Love and Light Leo. And what's interesting is through his 40 years of research, he found very similar commonalities between abductees and this process they go through. Because when you're a child and if you get abducted young, it is a very fearful experience. Even when you're older, being taken away is something terrifying. But what he found is you kind of go through this period of isolation where you're alone, perhaps depressed, you get PTSD, and then you kind of get set on this path of this mission. A lot of these people feel they have a mission or a goal to accomplish, whether it's environmental, whether it's scientific. Different people have different things they just feel driven and passionate about. And this contact never seems to leave these people. They have lucid dreams. They feel almost, they have more psychic abilities, more intuitive. A lot of musicians, artists.
But the stereotype of it is so negative. Like when you hear about it, it's always like, well, you were dissected on it, on an operating table.
No, you're violating.
Yeah, you're
violating.
So this is really interesting to hear is that in your research, you're finding more stories that are actually positive and transformative.
Eventually, they start very fearful and then they shift. And a lot of it too can be spiritual. You become more spiritually awakened. So yeah, it's really interesting.
There's one thing I want to just to backtrack a little bit about something you said, because I'm just interested that you started off saying this, that you were a skeptic initially. And so how did you, what drove you to want to look into it in the first place? And how did you, so you're not a skeptic. You still consider yourself skeptical?
It depends on what day of the week.
Yeah, right. In and out of skeptic. Yeah, I feel that way too, though. What day of the week? Like what hour we're talking about? Like I go back and forth all the time.
I do too. Yeah. There's so much to it. It's so deep.
Yeah. But how did you even get drawn to it? Like what was it about it that drew you to it in the first place? You hadn't had any experiences with this stuff.
Oh yeah.
You had? Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay. My grandfather was in the Navy. He lived in Wisconsin in Lake Geneva, and he had a sighting over Lake Como of this oblong-shaped craft. Now, this was before my birth, but it was investigated by J. Allen Hynek. And so growing up, I had heard this.
Who was a very famous.
Very famous.
He was a very famous investigator of this stuff.
And then we lived in Illinois, so going back from Lake Geneva to our home in Illinois, in Richmond, my mom always talked about this oblong-shaped craft that we saw on the side of the road. We pulled over, and she always said, Katie, you were in the car seat, you got zapped, you were like catatonic after that sighting. Wow. So that was sort of always around Thanksgiving Day dinner, we'd always hear this story, right?
Bust out that story. Here's the
time you got zapped.
Fast forward to 1970, we moved to Colorado. My mom, she was a computer operator for United Airlines and worked at the computer center. She divorced my father, started dating this gentleman who owns this ranch out in Elbert County, Colorado.
Okay.
So I didn't live on this ranch full time. We would visit the two younger boys that lived there, attended Cherry Creek School District, which is a large school district here in Colorado. And so we would drive the boys back and forth to see their mom to the ranch and sometimes spend, weekend nights or something out there. And this ranch predated the Skinwalker Ranch. Linda Moulton Howe, from 1975 to 1978, there was a rash of cattle mutilations. Linda Moulton Howe was an investigative journalist, and it wasn't just cattle; it was horse and cow and sheep and even dog. There were
I didn't know that. It's always.
Black,
Can I bet? Can we pause there for just a moment, because this is super intriguing to me. I'm definitely more on the skeptical side, I think, than Paul is. But the cattle mutilations and the animal mutilations really freak me out. Like, are these the cases that Paul and I have talked about before, where there's some kind of really clean surgical cuts that make you think it's not an animal? Is that the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And back in the day, and of course, I'm not the cattle mutilation expert. We have Chuck Sukowski, who is actually local Colorado, as well as Christopher O'Brien wrote several good books about it, and Linda Moulton Howe. But I have, so I've investigated this ranch property now for over a decade.
The Albert Ranch.
The Elbert County Ranch for over a decade.
And this is the one you had experiences with as a child.
Yes. And my question always was, how much was military and how much was actually paranormal unknown, including the mutilations? And in interviewing these ranchers that have experienced mutilations and stuff, because I thought, well, maybe the military's doing it. Maybe they're testing the water, the ground. Because we have the
the
black helicopters, all this stuff. And they were menacing people. And what's that about? And so that's always been my question, which was it? What's going on? And but after interviewing some of these people, one story in particular, I drive to Wyoming to conduct this interview. And her family, if you go to the Elbert County Museum, her family pioneered this area, this little town of Kiowa. And she, right out of high school in 1978, moved to Rama, which is right on the border of Elbert County, pretty close to the town, when all this height of mutilations were happening. Her husband was out on horseback checking the cows for calves, comes across a dead calf on the ground. And there was 4 cuts in a perfect square with the top of the fur removed, but the skin was still there. He gets on the horse, goes back to the house, gets my witness. They drive back in the pickup truck, which took about 20 to 25 minutes. When they got back, that little calf was completely mutilated, cauterized, organs removed, blood drain. Only thing around the calf.
25
minutes. They said it felt eerie. They felt they were being watched by somebody. This was miles off the county road in the mid.
Cauterized, like clean, like.
Cut. And here's the great thing. So we're friends on Facebook. She's like, Katie, you're not going to believe this. I found the photographs. And what's really cool is they had photographs of calves that are attacked by coyote. So coyotes will jump up on the hind and just rip them alive.
Right.
This is cauterized, blood drained,
and geometric shapes and
organs removed.
But I've read stuff that says that there is there's been some experiments done with leaving a carcass out, and that you can get the sort of blood loss thing, like the settling of the blood can make it seem like there's no blood in the thing anymore. And that in some ways, some of these parasites eat the asshole and stuff, that it can mimic it pretty closely.
Yeah.
But the thing that freaks me out is this thing about these clean, scarred wounds that are like closed wounds like that.
Right.
Which couldn't
and this
be
wasn't
anything.
a 25-minute period. I mean, one of the things that is reported.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's really crazy.
Yeah. And one of the things that, is reported and even talking with my witnesses, like mountain lions, we have mountain lions out here, and coyotes, with these mutilated animals, they won't approach them. They won't eat them.
Oh, really? They'll leave them alone.
Bugs, not even gnats.
And that's what
I've heard.
There's no evidence of any predators. There's not. You would see the evidence that something was there eating this thing.
Right.
So it's as if they've been either attacked from above. Something's happened from above, which would suggest like helicopters or something like that.
Perhaps,
what
or
is
something.
But what would the military I have no theory on this. Like, I find it very troubling. But like, if it's the military, what are you thinking what in the community? What's the general theory that goes along the lines of this? The military is doing an experiment on an animal. Like, what would they be doing? Yeah, why?
Yeah, why? Exactly. I don't know, like contaminated water, ground, mad cow disease, different theories like
samples.
that, or genetic, blood, things like that. But
couldn't they just approach?
Exactly.
It seems like there's an easier way to do that.
That's
than come in and
too.
kidnap the cows and cut them up. I mean, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense.
I agree. And something that Chuck Sukowski just brought up recently in an podcast I was listening to with him. It's like, this has been going on now for, 40 years, 35, 40 years.
Yeah.
And we don't have evidence of any mistakes happening. Like, there's no human mistakes going on. And another thing you have to remember,
meaning
like we don't have, things left behind or foot
whoops.
tracks or oops,
Whoops, the wrong cut, a bad, poorly made cut.
Exactly. And the other thing to remember is, in the midst of this height of these cattle mutilations that were happening in Elbert County, there was a $10,000 reward at the time, which $10,000 in 1970s,
that would motivate you.
that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
People had loaded shotguns by their door. They're like, they had like lookouts at night. They were actively trying to catch these perpetrators. People were on edge. People were scared.
Sure.
They thought they were going to go to humans next. We had the Colorado Bureau of Investigations involved, the governor involved.
Really?
This was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, when I flew to Florida to do some interviews with the undersheriff's widow and his son, because we had the Undersheriff Bill Waugh and George Yarnell. They were both in Linda Moulton Howe's film A Strange Harvest, which I recommend watching.
Okay.
So I went and flew and interviewed them for a day. And, she's like, you don't understand. They actually had a no-fly zone over the county. I mean, there was so much that was going on at the time. So my question always was, like you said, why would the military do this? And that property where a lot of the phenomenon happened, although it happened all through Elbert County, but it was vacant for 10 years. If they wanted the property, they, meaning military, they would have just purchased the property.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-mm.
More with Katie Paige after this ad.
And now, more chinwag. Well, here's another theory, which is, it's sort of like the crop circle theory, what made it. And so if it's not the military, then you think, well, maybe it's like actually hoaxsters, people who are actually, I know it's a hard sell, but I got to go to everything before I get to aliens,
Right. No, no, you should.
But hoaxsters,
as
like
you
how?
Should.
Yeah, as you should. That's the sensible thing to do, Steve. But hoaxsters meaning what?
Like
what
you and I go out there with some surgical tools in the middle of the night.
Again. Okay, so it's just
like
hoaxing it from the get-go, or now going like, I'm just going to hoax it because this thing happened, and now I'm just going to continue it by hoaxing it.
Yeah, I think like that there could have been some phenomenon that's weird. And then it snowballs into like a cultural kind of tradition.
Is that the crop circle? Because I can never get this straight with crop circles. Do you know are you a crop circle person?
Well, probably like you guys, a lot of the vast majority of crop circles are man-made. But here's something interesting.
Okay.
Here's something interesting I just learned myself. So Colorado MUFON meets the second Saturday of every month, and we usually bring in guest speakers, and I have speakers on my podcast. And so we had Dr. Simeon Hine on, and he's written several books, and he's, a brilliant man, and his specialty is crop circles.
Uh-huh.
And what is interesting, even in the man-made crop circles, when they look at the magnetism, they're highly magnetized.
Meaning what?
Meaning something happens when even men make these circles, or people, men, women, make these circles that magnetizes or does something.
And you think the result of the pattern is magnetizing it, not that they happen to find a magnetized spot to make the thing on.
Or they have drawn attention by UFOs now that are now changing the magnetism.
That making that thing is causing something to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, because I remember, because I had always been in the impression that they weren't man-made. And then I remembered seeing something about these British farmers who were like, we go out and we just take these things and we take them around the thing, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's actually kind of amazing. I was like, and you guys do those fast. I was like, that's actually pretty impressive.
I asked Dr. Simeon that. I'm like, because they made some circles and tested the magnetism. I'm like, how long did it take you to make that? They're like 3 days.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, you can't just make. So there are some that I believe are mysterious. From some other phenomena. Now, whether it's aliens, I don't know, because you got to look at, like, with acoustics, like sound vibration, when you play a certain frequency and you put the sand and it makes those cool geometric. Is it something in the ground that's causing that? I mean, so I'm not going right to aliens here, but we did have that a SIBO message. I don't remember the year of that, where we sent out a message, and then we got an answer back in the fields, really close to where it was, and it basically talks about their.
Wait, what was the message?
Wait a second. Okay, wait a second. I haven't heard about this. So what happened? So you somebody sent out a message saying what?
Yeah, basically about human DNA and the population and planet Earth, and how.
What if you guys screwed us all by sending this?
I know that's a big risk you guys are taking.
Right.
So you send that out,
and we got a message back
in the form of a crop circle.
In the form of an identical in a crop circle, and it basically talked about their height, their beings, their population, where they're from. Yeah, I'll show it to you after we.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Amazing.
And I think that's a real one. I do.
All right. Yeah. To get back to those ranches and your experience. So you had experience as a child of this stuff.
Right.
And do you remember this stuff? What do you remember about it? What was the deal with the ranch? And
well, both my sister and I, so my sister's 6 years older. So I'm 9 to 12 years old during these high strangeness years, and my sister's in her teens, right? So I'm the youngest of the 5 kids because the people that owned the ranch had 3 sons, 3 boys. And I had experiences in the day that were quite frightening. We both experienced just some weird things that never left our minds. So for me, growing up, as we all do, we, grow up, we get married, we have families, we get our education and jobs. And I just had these unanswered questions, like, what was all that? And the one thing that stands out the most and what I want our listeners to understand is we were threatened and warned never to talk about what was happening. We were told, don't you ever talk about what's happening.
By who?
This disembodied electrical voice that happened at the ranch house. It was terrifying.
That's so interesting.
Terrifying. So me and my sister, we created this little language to talk with each other about. We'd hear the adults kind of talking about police being called and cattle being mutilated and these unmarked helicopters, but we never got the details, right?
Yeah.
So there were all these unanswered questions. So I never knew anybody knew anything about the ranch property. I didn't know it was investigated. It was just like this secret we had. So when I first, because I always compartmentalized all these different experiences for me, because we lived, off Arapahoe Road it was Englewood at the time, now it's Centennial. But I would have these shadow beings in my rooms and balls of blue orbs and paranormal activity in the house. And I never associated it with what was happening on the ranch. Now, come to find out, a lot of these high strangeness places and people who visit them have this hitchhiker effect, okay, that kind of connects to them and follows them to wherever they are, back to their homes, and paranormal things will happen. So I'm like, oh my gosh, that I had that my whole life. So a sense of being watched.
These things happen to you in other locations.
I think something connects.
And maybe other family members too?
Okay. Yeah, abductions, contactees often run in families.
Yeah. And we just had somebody tell us firsthand an extraordinary story of abduction. This person wasn't abducted, but the person they were with was abducted. Oh, wow. But what's interesting is that, because I want to talk about a disembodied robot voice like that. I haven't heard that as being a feature of this, and nothing makes me happier than the idea of a disembodied robot voice. That is so fucking freaky. That's so freaky. But one of the things that this guy said, in just telling us this story, because he said this event happened, and they didn't talk about it. These two people went their separate ways eventually, but they didn't talk about it for 17 years.
Right.
And then
that's common.
His companion called him and wanted to talk about it because suddenly she wanted to talk about it. But I said to him, why didn't you talk about it?
Yeah.
Did you feel, were you embarrassed? Did you not want to? And he said, no, it's like something told us not to talk about it.
I hear that often.
He said it was a suggestion, do not talk about it. That's fascinating.
Now, why, if you had that experience too, and it was like a voice almost, do you think that's because aliens are reaching out to select people and they don't want they don't want that information to spread to the larger community or population? Or you're just like, I don't freaking know why.
I don't know. And that's, I really pride myself as being a researcher and investigator, because I'm grounded kind of in documents and I want to know, was that the military? Because everything that happened out there,
was that
they can do that.
Totally.
Why?
Totally.
Why would they? But then it's, why would they do that? Why didn't they just purchase the land? Why would they go through this enormous thing? Because they were Sasquatch.
Why would they make a robot voice to talk to me?
There were Sasquatch out there. So
Sasquatch.
Yeah, Sasquatch out there as well, which
here we go.
He loves Sasquatch. He's very big on Sasquatch. But please keep going.
Please go.
So if you know the area, it's it's really rural, and there's only these patches of ponderosa pines, right? It's not forested everywhere. It's not like in the Rocky Mountains. I'm like, if there's a family of Sasquatch living there, they have to be going somewhere. You would see them, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I know it's kind of, controversial, but in the Elbert County case, I believe the Sasquatches were connected to the craft, and we'll get to that.
Yes.
So fast forward, I joined MUFON in 2012 because I had all these unanswered questions. I came right in as a field investigator.
And let's define MUFON just real quick.
MUFON is the Mutual UFO Network, and I learned about it just watching a documentary on TV. I'm like, oh, I'm a graphic designer. I have my degree in visual communications. I'll draw craft and ETs and I never did that, but that was my intention. And I can answer this mystery from my childhood. And so in 2013, I purchased a book called Hunt for the Skinwalker by Colm Kelleher and George Knapp. I start reading the book, get to the chapter Other Hotspots, and I start reading about the Colorado Ranch of my childhood.
Wow. Amazing.
And I'm like, nobody knew where the true location was. It was dubbed the Clearview Ranch or the Rocky Mountain Ranch. It was this big mystery. And I'm like, oh, I know. So, but in that book, they talk about that there were 3 PhDs that investigated the property. Dr. Leo Sprinkle, Ph.D. from Laramie, and I drove like that next week. I'm in his office, digging out the files. Dr. Peter Van Arsdale and Dr. Peter Van Arsdale and John Durr, who was a seismologist. So he's out on the ranch doing science. And so I found John Durr too and spoke with him about earthquake lights, which is a fascinating topic. But anyway, so this was the first I learned. And so the founding father of MUFON is right here in Colorado, one of the founding fathers. His name's John Schuessler. And when he learned of my connection to the ranch, he's like, hey, Katie, I have the original APRO report because this was investigated by APRO at the time.
APRO
Boom.
is...
It's like it's the MUFON, pre-MUFON.
It's a sort of civilian, it's a group of sort of civilians who are investigating.
Yeah, we're all volunteers and we get reports in. People will see something and, 90% of the time we'll say Starlink satellites, a bug, a lens flare. So, we do a lot of Flight Radar 24, Heavens Above, Stellarium. Some people, if you watch the planet Venus for long enough, it looks like it starts to oscillate and move and then they zoom the camera in and it looks funky and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you try to identify, look, there's a natural explanation for 90%
eliminate
of
that
these
first.
things. You eliminate that first.
Yeah.
But what a frustrating career you have here because you eliminate 90% and then the other 10% you're like, I don't know.
I don't know.
And if people tell you they know what it is, where they're from, they're lying to you because none of us know.
Right.
And so that's funny.
But that's good. You have an open mind.
Yeah.
But I love that. But I love that uncanny feeling of not knowing. I like that 10% that I have no idea is awesome.
Yeah.
It keeps you
yeah, I love that.
More with UFO investigator Katie Paige after this. And we're back with more Chinwag.
Now, give us a little thumbnail sketch of the Skinwalker Ranch.
So the Elbert County Ranch predates the Skinwalker Ranch. And basically, if I talk about the Elbert County Ranch, it's identical to the Skinwalker Ranch.
Either one.
So,
you talk about anything
I just want to talk about what I know more. I read the book and, I know there's a lot of activity at Skinwalker, but they're so
fantastic.
They're so parallel. Good. So we covered the cattle mutilations and and at the time, what's another thing, just to finish that topic, in interviewing the sheriff, I mean, it was going on across the whole Midwest. So you had a mutilation happening in Montana and you had one happening in Elbert County, and the police, the sheriffs were talking to one another and keeping maps. So they were almost happening at the same time, which is really fascinating.
That is fascinating.
So but Elbert County was hit the hardest by a lot. We had the most than anybody else. And I don't know if that's because of the close proximity to the Air Force Academy, to Camp Carson. Butte has one of the biggest military helicopters there here in Colorado Springs, NORAD's out there, whole thing. So anyway, but we had unidentified balls of light and craft flying on and off this property for decades. And when I was researching the ranch property, the provenance of who owned the property, I learned that the Mulligans, it was known as the Mulligan Ranch, and I came across this wonderful article about a gentleman named Dick Mulligan. And at the Winter Park Ski Resort, there's Mulligan's Mile. It's a difficult black ski run. And so he was born and raised on this very property in Kiowa. Okay. And it said that Dick Mulligan was known for his bold exaggeration and his da-da-da-da-da. That's how he was known.
Tales.
Tall
Dick
tales.
Mulligan with his tall tales.
And I'm thinking, Dick Mulligan was telling the truth.
Oh, that's old Dick. Really? Dick was, okay.
Dick was telling the truth. He grew up on that high strangeness ranch.
Right, absolutely.
He knew. So I found that really interesting, right? So things for decades. So there were craft. There were 2 types of beings reported out there. And what's my favorite thing that happened to me. So I go to Dr. Sprinkles and I pull the original file and I get the original drawings of both Sasquatch and the ETs. I've never seen an ET like this before. Okay. It was very unusual. So I'm like, I haven't seen it in movies, television, magazines, nothing. I'm going to stick it in my drawer and see if I see anything else out there like it. So fast forward a few months and I invite this nice gentleman who wrote a book called Flashbacks. His name is Sean Bartok. And I'm sitting watching his presentation, and he had a property in Castle Rock in the book.
Quote,
yeah.
Sure.
It actually was only 14 miles away from the ranch, okay?
Okay.
In a different town, but he wrote it as Castle Rock to protect the area. And up pops a drawing of these beings they had interactions with. And I was like,
looks
side
like
by side, I overlaid them. You couldn't get any closer. So they had these very heavy brows, okay? Wrinkles here, these tubes that came out. Not the big wraparound eyes, but larger than our eyes. Almost identical drawings.
Tubes.
And the tubes in Sean's drawings, they were like tubes in the neck. But on the ranch, the tubes came out with this like protection thing over their body.
So it's like they're wearing some kind of suit that has some kind of
some sort of protection of their torso, but very long, spindly arms and legs, almost spider-like. Right. Very unusual. Yeah. Very unusual. And so I'm standing in line at, I don't know, Albertson, Safeway, wherever I am. And there's an issue of Popular Mechanics, and it's all about AI. And they had drawings of these AIs, and they had like tubey things. And I'm like, oh, maybe those are AI. Oh my gosh. But the other type, the other type that was reported there were these Nordics. Okay. And they said that these two were in conflict with one another.
What did they look like?
Nordics are a kind of, I've heard, I've never heard about the weird tubey people.
That's really
bizarre.
I have drawings. I have drawings.
I'd like to see the tubey people. But the Nordic thing I've heard about, because,
what's the Nordic thing?
They're typical blonde, blue-eyed, very,
aliens.
Yeah.
Wait, the aliens look like Scandinavian?
Yes, they have like kind of long beards, robes.
Some of them do. Some of them are reported.
Sort of like, this very sort of, but again, what's interesting is, and when is this that people are talking about seeing these? Is this like...
This was during the 70s, during this whole high strangeness.
And what's so interesting is I feel like I associate those Nordic ones with the 70s. I feel like it's not something you hear about as much now.
Right. You bring up a great point.
Yeah.
Because the phenomenon has shifted through the decades. Yes. And of course, the 70s are my favorite. I like anything cell phone, internet, CGI. Give me the old film, that kind of thing. So that's my favorite decade. But back in the 70s, we did have a lot of reports of more like ETs in suits and their craft landing, and even reports of people like the ETs coming down and they have trouble with their craft, so they're like fixing the thing. That kind of thing. And you're
little
like
guys in these kind of like workman uniforms.
Yeah, and they're like, okay, and they're out of it. I know it sounds funny.
No, I've heard all these things too. It's interesting to me that they evolve, that they're almost culturally determined too. Like you'll see different kinds of things.
We're evolving. Why wouldn't they?
Yes, why wouldn't the thing evolve? But it is interesting, the variety of them is also really fascinating.
Well, look at our cars.
But I guess I'm, this is where I get kind of more skeptical. Like I'm really open to the idea of the UAPs, of the UFO sightings.
I don't like UAP. I like UFO.
Okay, let's stay with UFOs. Okay. So let's stay with UFOs. But I guess when I get to the descriptions of the characters, they feel so bound by the culture. Like if you've got like Gandalf, looking like an alien and Sasquatch, and then the Greys. I just feel like, I'm not saying the person isn't seeing something, but it seems like then they're using the culture around them to lay that on top of what they're experiencing.
That somehow it's informing it in some way.
Yeah. Let me answer that.
Yeah.
You can't be in this field for years and years and decades and not eventually come to this conclusion. Because I know a lot of what we call nuts and bolts guys, right, that stay in that lane. But you can't ignore the spiritual side of things, right? Or this weird kind of connection and the manifesting. So let's say, in 1977, we have Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Star Wars came out and all that. If we as humans, our brains are so powerful, like we're supercomputers, each one of us. And if we have the power to create the phenomenon itself, which I think we do to a degree, then that would make sense that would fall along the lines of popular culture because that's what we know. That's what we're manifesting.
We're manifesting it anyway.
And creating it. So,
that's like the contact theory, like Sagan and the film, the Jodie Foster character sees her father, and is the theory that the alien lets you see something you can relate to or something? Is that the idea?
Well, it's
green memories.
The Skinwalker Ranch and what the ranch you're talking about, and like all this stuff always makes me think like the Mothman stuff. It's like this incredible variety of stuff happening. Feels like it's like this. It's all this sort of individualized manifestation of some baseline weirdness. That's like, it's like it'll be a flying saucer and it'll be a Sasquatch, and it can be all of these things, and they're all somehow integrated and related in some weird way. So it's very kind of spiritual and mystical. Like what we're calling forth out of it too is some sort of, and I think it's one of the abduction stories I wanted to talk about was the Betty Andreasen one, which to me, do you know the Andreasen story?
I know Betty and Barney Hill.
Well, that's a very...
We got to talk about that too.
Yeah, we can talk. The Betty Andreasen story, which if you don't know it, you should really... It's fascinating. There's a book called The Andreasen Affair, and she was this...
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, Massachusetts, housewife in the 60s, 70s.
Catholic, right?
Very Catholic.
Oh, I do know this one.
Very Catholic.
Yes.
And her experience...
She wasn't alone, right?
No, her family and stuff like that,
involved.
and it followed her around through her life, and she got remarried, and and then her new husband started having these things. But it is literally like a religious vision, and it's very different from any of the other ones I've ever read. And it literally ends in this vision of a phoenix and a coming out of an egg, and it's all very deep religious imagery, mythic imagery, and it reads like a spiritual, like those saints' lives, and it has a genuine. It's really cool.
Yeah, there was a phoenix reported being seen on the ranch, so it's funny you brought up phoenix. Yeah, and I was going to say cryptids. I mean, there's parts of all these phenomenon that is for me. I try to stay grounded. That seems so like, okay, I don't believe in fairies. I don't believe in cryptid, but the more you're in it and the more interviews you do and the more people you meet that experience these things, just like with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, I was not in that camp. Come to find out, it's as big as a UFO thing. And there's so many credible witnesses that see these things. In fact, I was just filming for a week at the ranch. I just got to revisit it for the first time since my childhood.
Ranch.
Yeah. That was all. That's all. I had to sign a non-disclosure, but a lot happened.
Oh, come on.
And it changed. I don't want to get in trouble. But I met people in the local bar, local ranchers. And with this one guy, he's like, okay, me and my brother, we were out on our property in Elbert County, hunting elk. So you can see the elk in the photo, and then you see this Bigfoot. And I'm like, why aren't you getting rich on this photo? Like, you could be like, because it's a really good picture.
Really?
He's like, oh no, I don't want to. They don't want that.
Well, that's a big part.
And I'm like, they're
of it.
still here. It's still happening.
There's a UFO Bigfoot connection. Is there a sort of...
I believe in certain.
Yeah, explain that for me. That's fascinating. I am a fan of the Bigfoot hypothesis because I like the idea that there could be an interbreeding population of primates that we don't know about yet. So I'm a huge fan of cryptozoology and cryptids, but I treat it more like a Darwinian might, like there's a kind of biological species that we haven't discovered. When you connect it to UFOs, I'm like, whoa, that's not what I was talking about. What are you thinking is the connection?
Yeah, and I think both exist. And let me just throw this out to you. If we have, first of all, the amount of habitable planets out there now that we know is mind-blowingly huge. We can't even wrap our heads around it. So who's to say that there's not a species, an alien species that are Sasquatch?
Yeah. Maybe that's where they've come from.
Intelligent Sasquatch. They could be ET.
Maybe they are ETs. Yeah. And certainly there are accounts of people seeing these kind of hairy creatures on UFOs.
Yeah.
On them. I mean, so it's like
there's a great book by Stan Gordon that talks about these, and this is again going on for decades, and it's controversial. People are like, no, either in one camp or the other, but I think both can exist.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah, it's like
no,
we're
I think
connecting
it's all
everything.
integrated. I
We're
think it all
connecting.
connects.
We can all connect.
I actually think it's this kind of unified field theory thing.
Of
I don't
high-
actually have a unified field theory about it, but I think there is one that
Well,
can
I do
connect
too.
all these
I
things.
do too.
Is that what you
Yeah.
call high strangeness? Is that sort of the way that you would link? What does high strangeness mean? Is it sort of like Paul saying all this stuff is sort of connected?
yeah, high strangeness areas in my definition, from my experience, is when you have multiple phenomena. You have the blacked out, and the other interesting thing, these blacked out helicopters that were flying on and off these properties, they were chasing people. They were like menacing. There's articles written about it. I'm like, why would they do that? I ran into Richard Doty. Richard Doty was a disinformation officer, and recently he's come kind of back out in the limelight and is talking about what his job was and what he did and why. And I get all that. Our military, we have secrets we need to cover.
Sure.
If people are reporting to MUFON something unusual in the sky and it's one of our secret craft, they want to know about it.
Well, when you say he's a
So-
disinformation officer, is he like running interference on the military
I mean,
truth, like
if-
he's
And that's
Men in
what I-
Black kind of thing? Is like
let's say,
theory.
we're flying something and somebody reports it.
they have to
They
tell you.
want to tell you, like, yep,
Yeah.
that's a UFO. It's
They're gonna
not
bullshit
ours.
you about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
going to
So
tell you something.
they give a lot of truth and a little bit of lies.
Okay.
So Richard Doty, I ran into him at a conference in Laughlin, and I'm like, hey,
a lot
Richard.
of truth and a little bit of lies has got to be a good tag. That should be our tagline for the show. Anyway, yes, keep going.
A lot of truth and a little bit of lies.
I like it.
yeah.
And so I said, hey, Richard, I'm just curious, were you aware of this ranch property in the 70s? And he goes, absolutely, we were.
Wow.
Amazing.
And so he asked, so here's a whole other piece to this puzzle. So I found out through the research that we had a no-fly zone for a while, and even Stapleton Airport at the time had unidentified craft on radar. And so there was a report in the briefing document that I got of two A-10 interceptors that had crashed in Elbert County in pursuit of a UFO at night. And so Richard Doty told me, he goes, hey, if you want to get, do a FOIA, you can FOIA Kirkland Air Force Base and to the mishaps
And a
office.
FOIA
is
A Freedom of Information
Great.
Act.
oh, very good.
Okay, so I did. It's in my backpack right here. I got a big, thick packet back from the crash. It was a student and an instructor in two interceptors at night, and they had 255 rounds of live ammunition on board, flying over residential neighborhoods out there in Elbert County. And what's interesting, so there's a lot of blacked out, redacted
Yeah,
stuff
sure,
talking
yeah.
about secrets and lies.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, one of the causes of the crashes is that the instructor misidentified the rotating beacon of another aircraft as the students, and he hit the tail. Both pilots ejected, both survived, but they never, in any of the transcripts or anywhere, identify the other aircraft. They don't say, it's a Cessna or whatever. And what's interesting about that, one of my favorite researchers in the field is David Marler. And outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, he has the biggest historian library of all old documents. He has original Project Blue Book,
Oh, wow.
CUFOS, NICAP, all these big organizations. So, matter of fact, when I was there, I guess maybe 6-7 months ago, he had two big full boxes sitting on his table that is yet to be filed, and they're all pilot reports.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so if you want to ask me what turned my mind from being a non-believer to a believer,
No, that's compelling.
That's it.
Compelling
That's
stuff.
it.
Yeah. Let me just sort of throw in
the
a few
interceptor, yeah.
ideas here and here just for listeners. So basically, because you mentioned Project Blue Book, people may not know that in the 1940s,
Yeah.
you had like these interesting, pilot observations and Roswell, and then you got the start of Project Blue Book,
Yeah.
and then
Which was the Air Force's official investigation into official, and that's Alan Hynek too was
Yes.
part of that.
Oh, yeah.
and then just to update it to the present, I just wanted to mention to people that then that ended, but then it looks like we started again a governmental
Well,
program.
yeah.
I don't
That's-
think we ever stopped.
That's a whole.
Okay, right.
I don't
Right.
imagine we
Yeah.
ever stopped.
I don't think
either.
so either, but
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't imagine
right.
we ever stopped.
But the
Right.
report came out more recently that was also very expansive
That's a whole other
detailing.
thing.
Yeah.
That is, that's.
But go ahead.
Yeah. So there's two interceptors. So I was at David Marler's. I'm like just going through. I'm always trying to pull, any other correlating cases in that same time frame from across the country, and I come across. We have a NORAD station in Canada. And right there, it was like a 7 to 12 page white page paper about NORAD scrambled 2 interceptors in pursuit of a UFO. And then in this paper, I'm reading it, goes, oh yeah, this, it made the front page of National Enquirer. And David goes, hey, I bet I have that. And he goes to his files, boop, 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 boop. Front page.
He's got the
2 interceptors scrambled in pursuit of a UFO. So they admitted, and this was the same time that Elbert County, they admitted that they had scrambled jets in pursuit of an unidentified craft on radar out of Canada. And I'm like, so it makes sense to me. They did the same thing out here. So
now, what about the possibility that, again, like I'm still trying to eliminate other options until we get to aliens. What
We're
about
making a believer out of you.
Yeah, that's my goal. That's my whole goal.
What about the possibility that what we're looking at is, Chinese tech or, foreign tech, maybe our own tech that's being tested and then getting seen, how do you eliminate all that as a possibility? Or you don't?
You look at the Iran case. That's how you eliminate.
What's that?
Woo, that's an unbelievable case with, and even in, this is a whole other topic too.
Go ahead.
Balloons, the balloons we just shot down.
Sure, please.
Anyway,
that all seemed like some weird cover for something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just too strange.
That's crazy. So they shut down the instrumentation on these jets. These were close encounter sightings.
What was happening?
This was a big diamond thing, and they see this other craft come down.
Who was seeing this?
The pilots in Iran. So
no,
not our pilots.
Iranian
pilots. And they engaged in this thing. And I mean, it's an incredible report, and it's backed by so many witnesses and data and, all this stuff. So it's an incredible
case.
And
when was this?
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I believe it's in the 70s as well.
Oh, okay.
78 perhaps. I'm not sure, but.
So that sounds weird, but then I'm still thinking like why couldn't that be like a special government program? I mean, you always think of superpowers like the U.S., China, Russia. Well, nobody thinks about Russia's being able to do this anymore, but
they're clearly not. Capable.
Why not? Maybe there's some secret cabal working in Singapore in a bunker, and they're designing this.
Yeah, or
it's in Antarctica.
Right. Yeah, it's the Nazi UFOs out of Antarctica.
That's what it is.
There's a lot of that.
That's at least easier to believe than aliens, I think. That's for me.
Sure. And
you're looking at me like I'm the
No. I mean, I think that
we get it.
I believe that there's definitely weird stuff going on. There's all kinds of they're developing all kinds of invisible aircraft and stuff like that. I mean, they really are. And I mean, that shit is actually going on. And I mean, they've done all this crazy stuff, the remote viewing stuff, and they've done plenty of crazy stuff. I'm sure there's guys at the Rand Corporation working on time travel and shit like that. I mean, they're doing it.
Oh, yeah. But that might have even existed, right?
Time travel?
Yeah, Project Looking Glass. In your defense.
Wait a second.
Project Looking Glass.
Yeah, all right, of course. Wait a second. Just tell me, what is Project Looking Glass? What is it? Holy crap, Steve. Project Looking Glass. What in God's name is that all about?
It sounds incredibly badass. I know that.
Sounds terrifying. Steve, are you intrigued?
I am intrigued, and I have a sense that it might have something to do with time travel, but I'm not sure. It's a cliffhanger.
What is the Pentagon not telling us, Steve, about time travel? Jesus Christ! It was just a litany of freaky shit. That we were getting that we've been getting from Katie Paige, and. Please join us next week to continue the insanity in part 2 of our interview with Katie Paige from Colorado's MUFON. Yes. And by the way, friends, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, please. Leave us kind reviews.
Questions. We want questions, too.
That's also true. Questions or your thoughts in general. Yeah, fan mail is great, too. Send us fan mail.
We have received some letters, and we are reading them and really enjoying them. So keep that going because we're going to definitely read some of these on air.
Absolutely. So that's part 2 next week. Katie Paige, Project Looking Glass. Chinwag, out.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Our associate producer is Andrew Miller. Original theme music by Luke Topp with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production.
Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Audio production, supervision, and editing by Maxwell Carney. Additional audio assistance and mixing by Jeff Neal. Video editing by Brian Barczewski. With additional production management from Renee Levesque. Clara Wong is Celestial Empress of Benevolent Knowledge. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.